I have to say that I began my life working for the Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts. I was a social worker. I was the assistant director of the Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts. At the time, the blue laws were just being changed. And I worked in the hospital clinics with women who were indigent, who had no means of obtaining birth control because it was against the law not only to dispense birth control, but to use birth control. So in those early days, I was skirting the law. And it was very exciting to live in a time where the help that I could give people was limited to a very narrow subject, that is providing birth control for women who were my age, many of whom had 8, 9, 10 children. I have to say that I worked until the day that my first child, my first son, was born. And during the time of my pregnancy, I was most effective as a worker with women. I loved working in this context, working with women who really needed a way to control their fertility. We don't, now the issue is abortion, but imagine a time in which any sexual behavior with men could and often did result in pregnancy, and no abortion was available, except for wealthy women. I was very fortunate as a young woman because I went to Boston University for my college years. And while I was there, I found out that Robert Lowell, who was then the Pulitzer Prize winner, was teaching. I couldn't get into his seminars without permission, and I begged permission. He asked to look at a manuscript of poems, and through some miracle, he allowed me to enter that very famous workshop that educated Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. I did know Anne. We were not in the same workshop together. Sylvia Plath had left the workshop the year before I began. But I did attend at Boston University in what we call the English Department Lounge or Library, the analogous Boston University Lounge or Library, Anne Sexton's very first poetry reading. It was memorable. I began to understand that poets, and she had not published her first book, To Bedlam and Partway Back, at that time, but I began to understand that poets were us, and that I could write. I had permission, I had the charge to write as she did, and Robert Lowell made us understand that language is holy, and to be treated with respect. Of course, women in those days were not treated in Robert Lowell's workshop or any place else with the respect that we had hoped to have. On the other hand, we were not discouraged from working, and that work was very important to me then and continues to be. Of course, there I learned about Prairie Schooner at BU, because Prairie Schooner has been a famous magazine since 1927 when it started. So when I came to Nebraska, I thought, oh, Prairie Schooner, I will volunteer and see if I, again, can be taken on. And I did volunteer, and I was taken on. And I came to Nebraska to work at the University of Nebraska in the English department, but specifically at Prairie Schooner, the venerable literary quarterly. I was glad to have a chance to work there. And when I first came, Carl Shapiro was editor of Prairie Schooner. It was his last year here, and Bernice Sloat was just taking over the magazine. Bernice Sloat, she was my true mentor, and working with her, I learned almost everything that I know about editing a journal. Bernice Sloat taught me many things, but what I remember and use daily is that the more times you handle a piece of manuscript, the more human error creeps in. Surprisingly, the practical advice is what I most retain. What I personally retain is a moment when she turned to me and she said, Hilda, sometimes I wonder how I got in here. And she was referring to her body. And that sort of mind-body split, which is a common one for humankind through all of recorded history, is one that made her Monday significant for me. I think, of course, about that since so much of my work begins with the body. My writing has changed over the years because of my experience with my life. My major job for most of my adult life has been working with Prairie Schooner. I was very fortunate to inherit, when I became editor of the magazine, a rich legacy. I often say that Prairie Schooner is not Hilda's Quarterly. If I were to build a magazine from scratch, it would be a different journal. But the journal I edit has behind it the 5 distinguished editors who preceded me, and I pay attention to that legacy in almost every decision I make. As a writer, I am free to follow my passions for writers, new writers I read, and everyone. I think good writers are often people who have fragile boundaries, who don't see themselves as one thing or another, whose ego sense is flattened, and that's true for me. I can be influenced by anyone who writes, people who speak. I often, when I travel, listen to what people say to one another, and I write down exactly what they say. I'm ever curious about the ways in which people, through language, speak to each other, meet each other's expectations, or don't. And I'm grateful to have language as my medium rather than a more plastic, more tactile medium. I have put together the reading tonight in a thematic way. The poems address questions that are asked in the poems, and I hope that the arrangement, and I won't say much between my readings. Often I do speak between the poems. I will not do that tonight, but I hope the poems will raise questions and issues that they will also either answer or find unanswerable.
Well, thank you all for coming to the Heritage Room of Nebraska Authors. A little bit of trivia, this is program 102, and that's just in the Ames programs. We had about 13 poetry and fiction readings which preceded that, so this is wonderful. These are all readings by Nebraska authors. The Heritage Room, for those of you who have not been up here for a long time, we are a special collection of works by and about Nebraska authors, and we're dedicated to preserving and promoting these works by Nebraska authors. And currently we have over 10,000 volumes written by over 3,000 Nebraska authors, so that's a really rich treasury that we have here in Nebraska. Also, in an effort to promote the Heritage Room and promote these authors, with the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association, they sponsor the John H. Ames Reading Series to bring a local audience to the authors and to introduce the authors to a local audience. The Heritage Room is supported by an endowment fund which was established through the Nebraska Literary Heritage Association with the Lincoln City Library Foundation, and it's because of their volunteer support that we're here today and we're able to bring programs like this to you. So I encourage you, all of you, to come up and visit our collection during our public service hours. We'd love to show you the things that we have here and all the wonderful things that go on here. Tonight, I would like to introduce Hilda Raz to you. Probably doesn't need any introduction, but for those of you who might not know much about her, I'll give a brief introduction, and I'm sure she could probably share a lot more with you later. But she was raised in Rochester, New York, and received a bachelor's degree from Boston University, and moved to Lincoln in 1964 because she was attracted by this little local quarterly called the Prairie Schooner. Today, she's an associate professor of English at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and serves as the editor-in-chief of the Prairie Schooner, a position she's held since 1987. But that's after she's moved up in the ranks of the Prairie Schooner when she started as a volunteer manuscript reader. So that's quite a wonderful achievement. She is the 5th editor and the 2nd woman editor of the Prairie Schooner over its 70-year history as a publication which has a strong reputation both nationally and internationally for publishing outstanding literary works. Her career as an editor hasn't stood in the way of her own writing because she's published extensively poems, essays, reviews, and has put together 4 collections of poetry, including What Happens, What is Good, The Bone Dish, and most recently a book called Divine Honors, which is hot off the presses, and we just received copies yesterday. So we have a few of those for sale back in the back, too, along with 2 other books that she has there. So if you'd like, you can stop in the back and we can give those to you. So we look forward to hearing information from all 3 of those books tonight. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming. This is a wonderful crowd, and let's welcome Hilda.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Can you hear me? Is the microphone? No. Closer. Can you hear me now? Yes? Good? Okay. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav is reputed to have said, "Whoever is able to write a book and does not, it is as if he has lost a child." My daughter, home from college, tells me about the gods. Ra, whose chariot they ride over us by day, under by night, is in the unworld. They are pharaohs, or their indispensable retainers, named in advance on the tomb walls, thus guaranteed a place in the sunboat. She kneads dough while she talks, then rolls and folds the long loaves. Horus, who is one god and another, the bread rises under a linen cloth. She says human longing for mystery leads to a commonality of belief in immortality. And who is to know, she asks, patting the loaves onto a cornmeal tray, whether the unburned woman isn't really impervious to fire? Isn't it belief in the fire that makes us burn? The Sandhills, early winter. The girl in the back row sits perfectly still, doesn't answer my unspoken question about her pajama top, why she wears it as a blouse today in school, 5th period, when I teach her class, or why her eye is bruised shut, her glasses broken in the same lens, her skin cut, or why her paper is tattooed with hearts and arrows, broken in places under the ink for yesterday's lesson, but today's is blank, and she's slumped when I bend over her to brush the page with my palm and ask questions the other kids hear about sounds and smells, the texture of wind on gravel, on hard ice. But as I move on, she bends to write what I'd rather not read in my gym corner office behind the stage, and later I wave in the face of the principal. I read her lines out loud, and when I'm finished, he says a sentence coupling nouns and verbs in a way I've never heard before, and ends by saying, no, we can't do anything. That night, I buy her a bus ticket out of there, drive 50 miles to the Greyhound station, and click her seatbelt shut before the motor starts, and again, a plane ticket for where it's warm and the close sun heals, and take her home to my daughter's room. I drive to her trailer house in the country, and when her uncles and father come to the door, her brothers behind them, I smile and say, I'm the visiting teacher and we've got a problem. And on Friday, as always, I'm out of there. Visions. 3 women in a niche, their robes verdigris. A pale moss, the color of bronze, plushes the brick. From their mouths, the water of fountains dribbles, darkens the cobbles, runs down and pools their bare feet. An iron fence divides us from silver, the copper luck of coins. I dream about a fluent woman, trapped in a flood of language, a living flux her body interrupts. But into her is sluiced and out a particular speech so balanced, she is a floodgate, and from her mouth the tamed waters flow and chant. My son in his hospital gown, flayed ribs raising the thin cotton into a tent of air he breathes, wakes from long sleeping. A silent woman drowsing in a chair, his thin foot in my hand. I startle at lightning. He opens his blazing eyes. The conduits of his body charge again. Long filaments lift from his perfect head and sway like anemones in bands of light, thickening the edges of his room beneath the pale ceiling. Others, sheer filaments, connect with, touch, slot into, and braid. An entire tough weave, I know, keeps us, generation to generation, safe. Waves of air rock the chrome bed frame free of its straps and tubes, and his voice, unhinged from long silence, rises in vowels he chants in counterpoint with those in the niche of the saved. 3 women in a wet niche, their robes verdigris. A plush moss like bronze clings to the brick. Their mouths open in anguish, and out dribbles the fountain waters, runs to and pools the cobbles at their feet, scaly with copper, the silver luck thrown in. Family. The famous poet is sitting. She is sitting in a wicker lawn chair, drawn down by her arms to the head of her Dalmatian, unnamed on this book jacket. One could ask someone, a friend of the poet, not, as I am, a friend of the work. I don't know her, nor am I likely to, except through the clear language covering breast and genitals in her poems. Everything stirs, always, in the final stanza, but what comes before is static, passion in disguise under a cotton tunic flushed toward pink at the armholes. Her poems have no flowers in their arms, don't tell us, hold on tight, won't call us names we won't claim no matter how we want to. Our faces and noses reject the restraint of high forehead, middle German flesh packed in fresh skin, jut of heavy bone frame. This woman cooks, she preserves, she leads horses by the reins through the mushroom woods, makes rot into omelets redolent of basil, herbs grown not on the windowsill, but in their own plot behind the larger kitchen garden, where horse droppings are forked under in service to what turns air to fire. In the picture she sits, head lowered to the dog. I love this woman and lower my head to her, to rest on her text, rest my arms, arms that flower into hands, on their center fingers, the pale, mine-cut diamonds of my dead mother, on the pink jacket of her new book. People often ask me why I write books or try to publish my poems in a book, and I came across a quote recently. It's Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. I was so struck by the presence of mind that infused life into words, into language, and put the charge, the responsibility on us to write if we can. As an editor, I need your words. We all need your words. But as a human being, if you can write, you must. This quote, that's a gendered way of looking at art, and I think it privileges women who give birth, and many women choose not to give birth. So I understand when I quote this quote, what I'm doing, and it's with a little bit of nervousness that I choose this quote. Nonetheless, it moves me, and my new book is being written. I am writing this new book with my son, my second son, Aaron Link, and so this book we're producing together is the book that will have this epigraph. The worst thing that can happen, said Cynthia Ozick, is not to be published when you're young. She said this in a New York Times interview, and she was very famous. Her first story was published in Prairie Schooner, and she said, I will always be grateful to Prairie Schooner. I did not publish until my 30s. It nearly destroyed me. If you want to publish, send out your work. The most memorable piece of writing, my favorite piece of writing that has ever been published in Prairie Schooner is always the one that's on my desk right now. So my favorite comment about Prairie Schooner was made by a friend who called 2 days ago to say, the new Prairie Schooner came in the mail and the cover is great. Each magazine brings letters and praise and awards. There isn't a major national award that the magazine hasn't won. In the past 5 years, we've had Best American Short Stories, Best American Poetry, Best American Essays. We've had pushcart prizes. We've had O. Henry prizes. We've had reprints in every major prize volume. But the comment that comes in today is the one that I most cherish. In 1990, 9 months after major surgery, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Treatment included mastectomy. Since I was a writer, I wrote the poems that comprise Divine Honors, as well as essays commissioned before my illness, which became essays about breast cancer. I began to collect work by other women writers about breast cancer, now a book manuscript, soon to be a book coming from Persia Books in 1999. My personal obsession with illness, treatment, and recovery became part of my professional life. I tried to document the process, the ground of Divine Honors, the strategies for writing. Thinking about the way shock informs our work, I devised forms and used established forms and ways of thinking about language, concrete poems, etymologies, to multiply options for writing and thinking about a changed self in the world. At first, I embraced and later rejected standard tropes about illness. Events have reasons, pain ennobles, character builds from challenge, and narratives can be discovered and ought to be. Carol Oles, a longtime writer friend and collaborator, and I had begun to work on female collaborations, so I chose to use my illness as a collaborator, a goad, a subject, a focus on life and proliferation, a metaphor, and an opportunity. The altered space I inhabited outside my body, as well as the space my body encloses, became then subjects for work. Gertrude Stein's question in Poetry and Grammar became my own. Was there a way of naming things that would not invent names, but mean names without naming them? Shock took away my customary fluency, even my language. I gave some of the poems multiple titles with slashes to show that texts are no more fixed on the page than the body is fixed in the world. Some poems are prose paragraphs with line breaks in seemingly random places. Others appear to be babbling, shaped to fit the moment and make it intelligible. I thought a lot about boundaries and boundary transgression, the primary sin of the builders of the Tower of Babel, and about feminist psychologist Carol Gilligan's observations that for women, ethical boundaries are often fluid, our judgments made in the best interests of community, our sense of an extended self. The poems in Divine Honors are rarely autobiographical. Details are stolen, inverted, distorted. For example, although I lost my right breast, in the poems it's my left, because the heartbeat is louder without a breast to muffle it. Sarah, my daughter, lives in my mind. I have 2 sons, John and Aaron. My own sexuality is often different from the sexuality in the poems, and the circumstances of my continuing life no longer include obsession with breast cancer. In 1990, 1 woman in 9 had breast cancer. Now, 1 woman in 8 has breast cancer. Then, more people died of breast cancer in a year than had perished from AIDS since that epidemic began. Research money was minimal when it was available. The National Cancer Institute budget increase for 1990 was less than the rate of inflation. Now, the New York Times Magazine of January 11th reports a very different story. Breast cancer is the disease of the moment, our 15 minutes of fame. I hope that the publication of Divine Honors this year will attract some attention. I hope so for all our sakes. The book is written in 5 parts with a prologue and an epilogue. And I'd like to just read you a sample of what's in the book. This poem is the first poem in the book, and it's from the prologue. It's called Repair. Repair. In my house, men tear out the floor, hammering. Then wood splits hour on hour. You almost need safety glasses for this work, the blonde says. And truly, as I go for the phone, the kitchen is now rubble. Delight, a paste bubble in my throat. If anger is tangible, here it is, a danger to these men who let fly plaster, the smell of something old letting go. They unmake what I made of my life. They unmake what I made with my life, or where I made it. Isaac Stern's performance. Here, plants, golden dry, rustle up green at soil's edge. Music roils in the room where I wait, my chest holding even at the scar's edge. Whatever chances I took paid off, and now I have only the rest of my life to consider. Once it was a globe, an ocean to cross, at least a desert. Now, a rivulet or a blowhole. I remember it was like a story, Ron Paul said on the radio. He told you the Beethoven concertos. I am telling you cancer. I am telling you like moisture at soil's edge after winter, or the bulb of the amaryllis you brought, raising stem after stem from cork dirt, one hybrid flower after another unfurling for hours, each copper petal opening its throat so slowly, each shudder of tone, mahogany, coral, blood, and ache, orgasm, agony, life. Meditation exercises are very helpful. One I learned is called fish belly mound. Fish belly mound. This is the fish belly mound. This place on your hand, under the thumb, this fleshy place. And this poem is called Fish Belly Mound. Can you hear in the back? Press in hard to hurt 9 times, twice or more, with your thumb. The other hand on that puffed up place. Thumb rigid and forefinger a rictus. Tight fist, fingers merged. Now, peace will flood you, an overwash from some ocean of light. We lay head to toe, neighbors on tables for treatment, both ill, both having lost too much to mention. The side of my body, numb forever, my clothes hid, still drifted on. He smiled through a red beard as our attendants strapped on electrodes. And the while his naked foot jerked and kicked and we talked, I pressed, and now have come home to shadows where I flail and sink in light, these words swim through. My fingers a net he tried to weave. This poem has a title from the Bible, a long title. Two are better than one, for if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. Open my chest, open my belly. You stayed close, your food bowl empty, your feet unclean. The steps in your head filled with wind, static, a glow of sand and grit. Or were you only sleeping those days? You sat by my bed, our hands touching, the concave round of your skull, a focus mirror, your eyes radiant. Several times when I slept, you lifted the phone and whispered. Later, sick, I knew whom you spoke to, God, your handmaiden, her fruit cheek rosy with health, not bloat. The camellia she brought me floated in round water, its petals germane, the only flower in that floral room I could see, night or day, follow with my bare shoulders shiny, intact above the bandage wrapped like skin, in moonlight, in midnight shadow. In the mornings, in window sun I dozed and woke repeatedly, myself camellia on the skin of the hospital bed. You never left me. Now I call you Scar. I have so many people to thank. Many of you are in this room. Some of you are not here. I thank you all. You all know the degree of my thanks. This next poem documents an experience I had. A colleague let me borrow a book. The book, in fact, the epigraph comes from. And in the book, as I opened it, I found, well, the poem tells. It's called Getting Well, with a quote from Anne Truitt's Turn. If I get well, I can take a walk in the snow and eat a red apple. You gave me 4 fair hairs from your head locked in the pages you left Monday morning in my mailbox, a sign of the passion of your reading. You would have me know how to write an essay, commissioned on the stuff of my life, on this model, Truitt's, or any other we might find together, the pleasure of our reading in concert as colleagues, hiding our camaraderie and health. Your sure recovery from the disease, I'm sure, will take me off. So I touch the binding, unsure of what you mean to say. Work can keep us alive to the world. Writing down some truth will help. What I know today has something to do with your hair caught in a book's pages. Fair, you stand up in the world to walk. Fair, you sit down in the sun to read, your head bent down to eat an apple. Here, you draw in the breath of the air and breathe it out so we can write. I mentioned the split titles, the divided titles. Many books, many titles in this book have 2 titles, 3 titles, all separated by slashes. And this poem is called Breast/Fever. My new breast is 2 months old, gel used in bicycle saddles for riders on long-distance runs, stays cold under my skin when the old breast is warm. Catalog price, $276. My serial number, 1754, means some sisters under the skin. My new breast is sterile, will never have cancer. Once every 60 years, according to the Chinese calendar, comes the year of the golden horse. Over me, your skin is warm, sweet gel, ribbon tongue, gold horse. You suck the blank to goosebumps. How am I going to get there when you're gone? Back to your young thing, sweet curl. He moans over your back, twitching your buttons raw. My scar means nothing to him. A maple twirl, a whirl-a-gig, your center and maypole. Death waits in the book, the woods, the TV, the helicopter blades merging over the house, your hair a fine curl, mist over your haunches, smooth hook near, you'll curl red over him when I'm under the ash gone, all mind or nothing, who the hell loves a tree? Don't tell me on the phone your voice, a fine ringing replica of mine, that you've got sickies, fever, ticks from the job. You won't worry about, don't I either, you nut, you bitch dog mother. I bred you out of leaves and mash, my blood on the floor, my liver colored placenta curled in a cold bowl. Who do you think you are with my sick breasts on your chest? Oh God, let me live to touch her, working out the next generation of women. The second part, part 2, has an epigraph from the great poet Wendell Berry. An art that heals and protects its subject is a geography of scars. Sarah's response. Research is what she promises to do for me. Right now, immediately, she knows whom to call, where to go, or she'll find out I'm not to worry. What there is to know, we'll know. And soon, I beg, far worse than any child terrified of disappearing, held down only by the thread, her voice, pulled through the wire at 20,000 megawinds. She calls when she finds out the bad news and the good to promise a package. Tradition mandates gifts to make it better. A kiss is what I want, her hand in mine. But this is what she sends, a box. The carton is heavy, cardboard walls they let me batter until I get to what's inside, intact within a web of tape and swaying, entire 6-foot stalk of Brussels sprout, 100 knobs or more, each perfect head and folded pattern. I know her message instantly. In the world that gave us life, or takes it from me, beauty so precise and orderly if seen by microscope or cell biopsy, or tissue through the light, is what divided cell from cell and made her mine, and him, and her, and you, dear reader, whose gel-filled eye reads out this message written 2 years later by my pulsing hand to honor her, harmonious daughter far away, whose play is radiance. Let her live. Sarah Fledging. Soft feather heart, blue jay and thrasher, and eagle's down she has gathered, each nail smoothing each barbed shaft, oiled so her fingers shine. Meadowlark and finch, cardinal, the junco, right upside up nuthatch, feathers skim on teak where she dips from a bowl to chamois against afternoon chill, pulls her needle through blood spots, dried mahogany. Flutter heart of the feather bowl as she shakes loose another, amber and dove-wet pebble from the patch by her elbow, reaches, gathers each shaft for a linen loop, and waxes and ties off. Whirl, circle, and wave of feather, jackdaw, hawk, the golden swift scooping mosquitoes from the backyard lathe house. Her hands reach to steady the softening cloak. It quivers, air from the floor vent. She turns, and now She reaches for the lamp and rises. Axe earrings, abalone shell. In leaf humus by the river, buried at the base of the ark, a light she watched fall. Sunfall on silver fastenings thrown from her earlobes, flesh scarred, healed for the holding of ornaments. What I wanted, a gift. Leaf humus smell around her, rising like water, red from sun, red falling from body, scarred, sealed, healed, an ornament now. Path over bridge, scar over mound, healing now, puckering, leaf mold over earrings, gift snatched from lobe, thrown in arc, light flaring from silver hooks, thrown away into river humus, leaf rot. At my elbow holding a woman, at my breast that news, skin smell of the newborn, born out into this world of melt and fracture, here at my side holding women. Some of you may know this fact, I didn't. The Sumerian god of poetry is a sow. Sow sister. The sow sister in barnyard mud shifts her crinolines to one side and lifts her thigh. Sun beats on her knuckle bones. Sow sister, mind me. Not that she doesn't hear, but staggers to the far grass, staggers and sleeps, her hair drying fast, stiffening. Sow sister, psst, wake up. Past patience, I am boiling you to nonsense, your hocks and breasts bone bold, your oils melting. You must thrive. Burlap sadness folded into packet statues, your cousin beaver's pelt stiffened with glue mercury into hats, shining. Ah, no. Well, so I will tell you a story. Lie down in my wild mud, slippery and warm. Now you will hear waffling far off in a bottle, and the heavens will open with malt. Cooked in your mouth, you'll come to know sift of slivered almonds and vanilla sugar. This story I'm telling. I'd like to dedicate the next two poems to my nephew, Jeff Raz, who may be here with his wife Sherry and his new baby Micah, or maybe not. I saw him in the back, but if he's here, Jeff, this one and the next one are for you. Cobb's Hill Pond. The snow at the edge froze, it was so cold. The January he was 11, big brother in hockey skates. Bent over my double runners, his knuckles whitened at the buckles of my ankle bindings. Our steam of breath touched the scarred bench where I sat, indifferent, as if the warmth of his body could never cool down, no matter how thick the ice grew. I'm 7.5, Sunday. Papa puts my peach snowsuit over my head, sips up. We're going fishing. Big freeze makes magnolia blossoms mush, but sky's clear. I tote fly fishing rods for Papa. We'll go where target rings in the water are primary colors to break the pond. Must be the red one calls him in. You wouldn't say why you were humming. You cast feathers onto water. Something shiny must have waited under the pond's surface. You hitched up your boots, stumbled off the bank humming, deeper and farther, until your hips in their rubber trousers soaked cold. You were shivering. Then you fell over, log, with only half a side showing, and lay still. I ran, stone without slingshot, around and around the flower tree on the bank until some snap went off, and I flew home for help. Too late, too late. messenger, bad pebble. I never saw them again. Fuss. Vowels, the O of his voice, shaking comics loose from the Sunday paper, his hands on their crinkling. And later, the gun in its open sack, shaken loose, lifted to the O of his mouth. We walked through grass to the reservoir, high circle we moved to enter, a girl in patent leather shoes, a man in boots, that stiff uniform swishing, khaki twill. His voice on the telephone lift and catalog the possibilities, what he bought, what he gave to the poor, his resignations. He lay on the metal floor of some car, rich with his blood, rich with his swell, and the round wind fussed for me, sister, it whispered. He turned to the door, chalk, his bones whitened and began to dry. He put the gun into his mouth and shattered, so he and his bones left me for good, for ash. He turned his face to the wall, to plaster of wall, to amalgam of fire and earth, to clay, and he and his voice left me for air, for not the O of his mouth. That's one of a set of 5 poems I'm writing. Surprise, on the vowels. Another one will appear later. Zen, the one I love most, holds my tongue. Done nothing to deserve this. Am something to deserve this. Sleep. If he is right, the world is a broad current of If he is right, the world is a broad river of emptiness, currents of everything tangible braided until the banks expand, dark sea shining within, dark shine flowing. If he is wrong, each leaf is a needle of light my skin encloses, folds over petal by petal until the coal ignites. Sleep, emptiness, how to reach shore. If he is right, I am the shore, skin no barrier to see. Skin see the salt molecules twirling, pain a current, electric swirl in a boiling we hold. Whether we ask it or not, we are all carried off. The one I love most carries my tongue in a pot. Without me, it says nothing to our common silence, is sea, hisses out. These poems are from part 4 and then a couple from the epigraph. Who does she think she is? Who does she think she is, risen from the cart, the sickbed, the steel trolley? Witch of the world, her roars hide in waterfalls so small no human on earth has seen them. Small I wander the paths of the world, dust, a miracle, nose to scoop air breathing. Between my skin and spine a thin layer of cells, a silence. Who do I think I am? A solitude, a poor bridge, small beer. Enough that my eyes focus on that emerald tree, that spruce, blue in its huge dying. Risen again, once more, the heat of my skin pours radiance, praise, salt and hops into the air, my skin a bracelet of psalms, my navel invisible, a veil. This is the last poem in the book before the epilogue. Vowels. Holes on the page. The eye picks up, the ear opens to, the eye finds irresistible. Wide-mouthed bass drift on weeds by the dam's breach. A lake in upper New York State, a pond near Syracuse, both yield their fish to the lone fisherman in autumn, his monofilament line hissing and dipping over water. Watch the bowl the line makes before fish strike, he calls, seating bait on his hook. Or, heather in fields, a purple glazed mist the bagpiper walks through, breaking stride only for the boulder, his pipes blowing for all hell to hear. Get out of there. He touches her breast with his ear as she cradles him now against an oval to break his heart, so she moans, or he does, touching her here. He made of the sound a conduit path, a drumbeat to his heart, a traveling, and when it arrived he exploded and burned and fell ashes into the base of it, the flower. So they begot music and were saved, and the ewe was in the thicket, well used, and the fish ground in the mortar, and horseradish, and another year turned. Divine Honors, the book of poems in which I'm delighted to celebrate here in the Heritage Room, which brings writers, Nebraska writers, to the whole Nebraska audience. And I thought it would be unwise to focus so entirely on Divine Honors, which has a more limited focus. The poems were written in response to my illness. And at that time, I had committed myself to writing a number of essays, commissioned essays, and I found myself with an obsession, a preoccupation with my illness, with terror that silenced me, and I did what I could do. I wrote a book of poems, and to read only from that book of poems would be to distort the corpus of my work. The corpus of my body continues, or the corpus that is my body continues, and so I would prefer to contextualize Divine Honors in a wider way. Two more from the epilogue. Another poem with a split title, Gloxinia/Flicker/Oxalis. Fists toast rose the color of your palm. Push up through leaves plate-sized, no more sturdy than the crockery you broke, throwing out everything soiled. Junk, the dirty pots, the cups with tea. These leaves broken by careless handling, functional enough for buds, thrust out on some time scale other than ours, furious to be free of shade, their record of growth a trajectory very like Luganus, leaving the board lift, tuck, his body like a bud, knees tucked into his arms against the fall, held to make a fist punched through air. Out this window on the copper bowl's lip, where you've made a pool, a bird folds down, not dainty like the chickadee or the hummingbird fed with oranges skewered on a bolt, but big enough, hunky like a robin and bold. The sour wood sorrel, Oxalis, explores the brick, creases the wood mulch, raises umbrils like milkweed, flowers rising from the core in profusion, many-colored, like the coat air wears when soaked with a hose you hold gently, the spray arc rising to fall tight in a stream until you open the nozzle at the bird bath and the flicker there opens her wings in holy light and the hot body leaps to mist enfolding all the garden there is and enters recovery. The fingers of the rain are tapping again. I send out my heart's drum. Blood stripe on the feathered tulip dissolves into wet. All night, a low thrumming. Up, up, the two-toned hosta, green from sopped earth. Along your bruised ribs, cream bells. Thank you.